honor for me to have Javan, who not only attended the last course out of professional interest, we've been peers and colleagues in the realm of values-based or holistic decision-making for some years now. And yeah, just honored that Javan kindly agreed to lead the session today and to share some of the aspects of this realm, this process, this approach that he's found useful, including what he calls daily statements of purpose, which is something I've gained a huge amount of value and adapted in my own application. And it'd be good to mention too that one great thing about having Javan's voice in the mix is to emphasize the fact that there's an underlying kind of attitude or way of being here, and then there's any number of ways it can show up in practice, and in terms of the terms and the specific way it gets used. And it's awesome that Javan and I have, there's a lot of overlap in the underlying attitude and a lot of distinctive kind of terms and, you know, the details of the practices. So thanks so much for coming along, Javan, who's also going to speak on the topic of some recent insights he's had relating to trauma and some of the inner obstacles we can find ourselves bumping into when we define and head towards what it is we most value. So I'll hand it over to you, Javan, and really, really lovely to have you along.
Thanks so much, Dan. It's been a real pleasure to have grown and learned from you indirectly, remotely, about 8 years ago when I discovered your work. And then for everybody else who doesn't know the story, a few years ago, I was offering my approach to values-based decision-making to Darren Doherty's Regrarians group. We worked through about 240, 250 farmers. Dan saw that recording and reached out to me, and we ended up becoming pen pals and video pen pals and colleagues. And it was an interesting circle where I had learned this process from Dan's Very Edible Garden articles from Permaculture Global, and then had that full circle. So yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. To everybody else who hasn't met me before, my name is Javan Bernakevitch. I own and operate All Points Design, which is a land and life design and cultivation business. And I help people design and cultivate lives and landscapes that are more diverse, more abundant, and if necessary, more profitable year after year. Something that's been really interesting to me for the last 15 years of my life is the idea of sovereignty. The idea that we are the creators and the created of our lives. And in so much of what I've seen in my own development and growth is when we are not sovereign, or we don't try and hold a place of sovereignty, at least I tend to go astray. And a number of the clients I work with tend to go astray, because instead of saying I have control, or at least I have direction around my life, we're allowing for others' interests, intents, biases, or outright designs on our lives to take hold. Something that came to me a couple of years ago is that if I didn't design my life, it would be designed for me, probably already had, and for somebody else's benefit, not for my own. As I was in that mind frame, I stumbled across Dan's work. A good colleague of mine said, you have to check out holistic management. And I think for many, and I think I was one of them, I tried to read Alan Savory's book, got a little bit over my head, language didn't quite land. And a colleague of mine says, well, you got to check out Dan's articles. He's really simplified it. And sure enough, he had made it very simple. And as I had learned it, and as I was describing it to people, I looked at it as, if we don't put our values first, if we don't put our states of being that we want to inhabit, we will be constantly chasing goals, constantly chasing whatever the new, latest, greatest thing is. Humans have an incredible proclivity for shiny thinginitis. Doesn't just affect crows and other birds. If there's something shiny, we get excited about it and we're going to go run towards it. And especially those in the regenerative agriculture field, permaculture field, we tend to think the latest and greatest is the best without saying, is it good for us? So as I developed my own way of looking at this called values-based decision-making, which is in essence identical to what Dan and Alan do, because all of this is the same thing. How do we make complex decisions at a time in history when we have more information than we've ever had before, but probably have less connection to ourselves and others than we've ever had before? Thus, the necessity for something like holistic decision-making or values-based decision-making. So now that I've been at this for the last 8-9 years, about a few years in, I realized I needed to make this more of a daily practice. It was great to make the values. It was great to sit down and spend all that time. And while it is one of the most, while it is one of the only self-honing tools, the more you use it, the better it gets. My knife gets dull when I use it. My chainsaw gets dull when I use it. But my context, my values get better the more I try to make decisions with them. I realized I wasn't doing it on a daily basis. And as I was thinking about that, it occurred to me that I read a book years ago called written by John Izzo, The 5 Things to Learn Before You Die. And John is a PhD, and he ran a little experiment. He had people come to him with the general goals that people have. I want to lose weight. I want to make more money. I want to get more friends. I want to be more loving to my spouse. And he split them up into 2 groups. The first group was able to make a very specific, defined goal, call it a SMART goal, specific, measurable, action-oriented, results, and timed. And so it was, I'll run 3 times a week. The other group was to give an intent, in essence, a value. What's the value they wanted to hold? Well, I want to hold movement. Both groups were told to write that on a card. Both groups were told, look at that daily. And 3 months go by, and they come back. And there is a monumental change between the two, a 60% difference in what the value was of what they stated they wanted to create. And it's pretty obvious the change. Those that had specific goals, I'm going to run 3 times a week, something would come up. It was raining that day, or they strained their leg on Monday, and so they weren't going to run on Wednesday. But they didn't think, okay, I'll do some yoga, or instead I'll do some rowing, or instead I'll just make sure I walk 8,000 steps a day. The other group, however, that just had the statement of movement, went out and moved. And every single day they moved a bit. And as we found out from books like Atomic Habits with James Clear and The Insight Edge, as we move forward, if we move forward a little bit every day, if there's only ever 1% days, which is a tool of sovereignty I use, 1% days for everything I'm working on. If I only move 1%, I'm always moving forward. And in that, I saw that there was an opportunity to take whatever it was within the context we're working on, if it's our life context or values, if it's our business context or values, our personal context or values, our land context or values, to take the major weak link, the major tripping hazard, the major thorn in our side, the major thing that we're like, oh, this is the thing that's really bugging me, and turn it into a value, to turn it into a statement that we want to be true. And what was so fascinating is working with farmers, working with white collar workers, blue collar workers, working with families. When you take something and you hold just one thing, not even your entire context, but one thing to be true all day, every day for a week, things miraculously happen. Dan has said it before, where our attention goes, our energy flows, and where our energy flows, our life grows, which is a lovely phrase that really is stuck with me and is an apt description of how daily statements of purpose work. So working with a client recently, a phenomenal farmer down in the lower southern United States, who by all metrics is a rock star, has done the impossible, has a profitable farm business, is well known, has waiting lists, on and on and on. The metrics for farmers was long, but they had lost their quality of life. They had lost the fact that they're also a human. They like attachment. They like having fun. They like not working 16 hours a day. And so they'd heard a podcast of mine and they called out, they said, I really want to figure this out. And it sounds like you can help. So we started going through values-based decision-making. And we got to the point in my work where we start to develop a daily statement of purpose. And the great thing about this is that it proves the concept to people immediately. And I said, what's the main issue? Like, what's the thing you're dealing with? And I got this big verbose answer, just like reams of story and narrative. And, it was a whole movie plot. And I said, great, but what's the thing that's most frustrating? And I think she first told me the thing that I wanted to hear. And then she told herself the thing she wanted to hear. And then she got really quiet and we got down to, I just feel so squeezed, like every day. I just feel squeezed by everything, by the suppliers, by what I think I should be doing for farming, what society thinks I should be doing by farming. And that's one of the great things about values-based decision-making or holistic decision-making is it inoculates you against your own biases and society's biases, so you can allow that essence inside of you to shine through your values. And so I said, great, let's make your daily statement of purpose, I feel less squeezed. Now, for those of you that have heard my work or Dad's work before, we usually actually do quite positive statements and forward foot statements and really statements that are quite large. But what I found with daily statements of purpose is that if it doesn't feel like you can accomplish it, it tends not to work. And this was found out in many ways by Alan Savory when he was creating these destiny statements of purpose, or the big statements. And people just thought they were too grandiose. It was really difficult for people to connect with them. And so her statement was, I feel less squeezed. And so I think our interval was 2 weeks or a week and a half or something like that between sessions, because I work predominantly one-on-one with people. And she came in, and after a week and a half, she comes in and she says, I had a few moments last week where I woke up and I felt amazing. I had space in my head. I had space in my body. I felt joy in my life again. It was momentarily, I was back into it again. But I felt it, because the way that I work with this is, once you have your daily statement of purpose, which is, again, whatever the major weak link in the whole that you're managing is, and it's done in a positive statement, even a little bit, like I feel less squeezed. Great. And what you do is you look at that 10 to 20 times a day. Now, if you're on a phone, that means taking a photo of it and turning it into the lock screen of your phone or the wallpaper of your phone. If you're using a computer, it means turning it into that. If you're more outdoors, like a lot of my farming clients are, it means it means carrying a pack of Post-it notes in your back pocket, and in your front pocket, you're writing your context on one of them. And as you're reaching into your hands all day, as farmers do, you're pulling it out. And when it finally gets shredded in about an hour, you write it down again. It's funny, those folks actually did the best with context, because they actually had to rewrite it over and over. But what you do is, when you look at it, you go, I feel less squeezed. And you go, okay, I don't feel like that right now. What can I do in this moment that'll make me feel less squeezed? And it might be bringing up tools or processes that you've used in the past, things that make sense, where it's like, oh, I've got a calming technique, or I've got that thing I really need to do, and that's actually the most important thing. Or it might be, I just needed to take a break and just take a quick moment, have a cup of coffee, and come back. For each person, it's different. That's the best thing about this work, is when you look at that over and over again, you're basically saying, this is the most important thing for me right now. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that this changes, that this becomes true, that I feel less squeezed. So sure enough, after those 2 weeks, she was less squeezed. This is really important. When I said, do you want to go bigger with this daily statement of purpose? Most people say yes. We're a meritocracy-based world these days. And so it's bigger, better, faster, stronger. Not just a great song, but also most of our mottos. She said, yeah, I want clarity and harmony. It's like, okay, great. I'm full of clarity and harmony. Awesome. Come back 2 weeks later, things are worse. So what we did is we reached a threshold that a part of her felt wasn't possible. Instead of saying, great, let's take the next step, we gave her Everest. And lots of different parts of her said, nope, not going to do that. That's too much. And she was really bitter. There was parts of her that came back really bitter about the process. And this is a great learning process for all of you. If you're going to use daily statements of purpose, make sure it's accomplishable. Make sure it's the next step. Make sure it's a tiny step. Make sure it's a step that feels workable. So I was in a car accident 3 years ago, and I have somewhere in the order of like between 4 and 10 of chronic pain every day. And mine is just, I have less pain. When I look at that every single day, the way I sit, how much exercise I get in the day, how much spinal decompressions I do, what I eat, everything changes because it's my focus for the day. Now, the great thing about daily statements of purpose is that the next day, future Javan, I've done so many favors for future Javan that when he wakes up, he goes, oh, wait a second, that really worked. And life design or life cultivation could be broken down to take note of what works yesterday, take note of what doesn't work yesterday, plan to do more of what worked today, plan to do less of what worked yesterday today. And as you go through this process, what you find is that the words and the sentiment, and I think I've said this to a number of folks who were in the last course of Dan's, the words don't matter, it's the sentiment. So if whatever the words are, create the sentiment of, oh, this is what I want, then it works. And as I'm doing these favors for myself, I end up understanding what it is that works specifically for me in my body, in my mindset, and all the rest of it. Twice a year, I run an open workshop about checking in with your values, making sure that you're headed in the right direction. And one of the techniques I use is to look back at all the favors past Javan did for present Javan. It's just a way of looking at the things that went well, but the things that I could control. And that's the great thing about daily statements of purpose, is it's completely within your control. Byron Katie, an incredible author and practitioner, has this wonderful saying, my business, your business, and nature and God's business. Out of those three spheres, there's only one I control. Sometimes in common productivity and self-help vernacular, it's called the sphere of control and the sphere of influence. Byron Katie's other tool of sovereignty that works really well with this is that I only suffer, but only when I argue with reality, and only 100% of the time. So I normally suffer when I step outside of my business and into your business or into nature and God's business. Oh, I don't want it to be raining. It's raining. I suffer. Oh, I don't want to have pain in my back. There's pain in my back. I suffer. And so this is one of the things that I really appreciate about this practice of daily statements of purpose, is that it just acknowledges this is where I'm at. I've got some pain in my back. And if I don't focus on it, if I don't work on it, it's never going to get better. There's no magical wand. I know me better than anybody else. I'm the expert on me. And I also know my wants better than anybody else. So as much as the practitioners I go to, the chiropractic, the acupuncture, the physiotherapist, the kinesiologist, the massage therapist, yeah, they can help me moment to moment, but it's my responsibility, because out of those three spheres, my business, your business, and nature and God's business, I only have one that I can control. So daily statements of purpose for me are a way for me to really hone in on the aspects that I want to change. And like all of this type of work, it's a snapshot in time. So my daily statement of purpose changes usually on a month-by-month basis, either the words or what's going on, because I check in with my context so much. Because as you do this work, you realize that it can create a masterpiece of your life, but not if it stays in your toolbox. A lot of people go through at least my work, and I've seen a few folks go through Dan's work, and this is no condemnation of him or I, because I do it as well. I go through lots of different learnings and programs. When I first did this work, I thought it was neat and interesting, and I put it away and never used it, and it never helped, shockingly. It was in the toolbox. And as I interviewed a bunch of holistic management trainers for the course that I led for Darren Doherty's Regrarians, I said, great, how much do you use your context? How much time do you spend with your values? Do you do things like spot check, which is very much, for me, a Dan Palmer invention? They're like, no, it's in the back of the journal. I don't really look at it that much. I was like, okay. So these are tools that you have to use actively, and daily statements of purpose are one way that I use this process to live a more dynamic, alive life. Because again, it's just a process or a tool to bring you to a different state of being. And if it's called values-based decision-making or holistic decision-making or holistic management, it doesn't really matter. It's just, does the practice help you to grow? So for those of you that are on the call, I just wanted to give you a moment, if you wanted to play a little bit, and just think about, let's go with your life for now, unless you have a business or a partnership or something that's more pressing. But just think for a moment, like, what's the main thing that's frustrating to you right now about that whole you're managing, that project? If it's your life, great. If it's your partnership, great. If it's your family, if it's a business, just consider whatever that is. Whatever it is, just choose one area of your life first, your life, your whatever. And then second, what's the thing that's most frustrating right now? And if you want, we can play this as a group, and you can throw whatever it is into the chat bar. I'm happy to play as well. But what is first the area? So put in your life or your business. And second, just put in what's the major weak link? What's the major tripping hazard? What's the main thing that you're really frustrated about with that area? So I'm going to put in right now, it's, if I'm totally honest, it's relationship, and it's a bit of a fight right now going on. So bit of a fight is the frustration. So you don't have to turn it into a daily statement of purpose yet, but just take a moment. For anybody who wants to play, you don't have to play at all. But if you want to play it, and if you want a little bit of feedback on developing a daily statement of purpose, this is an open offer to do so. So we'll just give everybody a moment if folks want to play, and put on what it is that they're talking about, what sphere or whole, WHOLE, and then what's the big frustration right now. So for me, it's my primary relationship, and we're in a bit of a fight right now. So Dan's decided to chime in. It's around his podcast, Making Permaculture Stronger, and struggling to get a podcast episode out every 2 weeks. Awesome. Thanks for playing, Dan. Just give anybody else a chance to chime in that wants to play. And again, this is play. This is, playing with the idea, playing with the work. For me, context works and values work is always play, and always it's a draft. It's a draft until we're dead. It's always changing. It's always moving. So whatever we come up with today is what it is. Troy, mine is relationship 2, underlying resentment and negativity. Thanks, Troy. Really appreciate you being vulnerable there. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Jennifer, me, too much time at paid work, too many responsibilities at work. Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. John, me, my life decisions about the future of my teaching career. Can it be meaningful contribution to my community? Awesome. Francesca, myself, lack of sense of self. Thank you. Lots of vulnerability. Thanks so much, everybody. Tara, home, organization, chaos of things. Josie, love, the intense pain and fear and distress I feel when I feel love and want to express it. Oh, thanks so much for sharing that. Wow. Whew. Everyone's decided to go deep right away. I really appreciate this. Josh, lost sense of self, spaces I occupy do not resonate with me. Wonderful. Rach, me accepting the work that comes my way and feeling a lack of control over my life. Yeah, I definitely feel that as well. Wonderful, folks. Great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a moment and consider what is a daily statement of purpose that feels like a step towards what we're doing, but doesn't feel so big like it's going to overwhelm us. When I work with folks in life design, chances are they come to me with a specific goal, or they're looking for direction, or they're looking to help create a better body, or what have you. And as we get into the specifics, there's always something they want to move. And what's really interesting is if you take a look at an ocean or a lake and a boat, if they don't want to move, they throw the anchor down. If you want to start moving, you don't have to put the anchor in the boat. You just have to lift it a little bit. If the anchor is an inch off the floor of whatever body of water there is, you can still move. There's some drag to be sure, but there's movement. And the great thing about movement is we feel if there's movement, we can keep going. This is why it's so important to set something that feels like we can achieve it. So as we go down the list here, we're going to start taking a look about how do we make a real accomplishable step. The other way of looking at this is setting the bar laughably low, working with folks who want to increase their physical capacity or their exercise. There's a simple technique I use, which is before you go to bed, do 1 push-up. And if all you can do is a wall push-up or a knee push-up or an incline push-up or a full push-up, that's great. But basically what happens is if you do 1 push-up, you're like, I could probably do 2. And so you do 2. And that's the genius of doing something that's accomplishable, is that if you do a bit of it, you feel you can do more of it. Feels like you already have the motivation to do a little bit more. So depending on how these feel, and you'll have to let me know, I'm going to run down the list here. And if anybody's open to it, we'll play a bit. So for Dan, struggling to get a podcast episode out every 2 weeks. So if this were me, if I was struggling to get a podcast episode out, I would imagine something around the realm of every day I make progress on a Making Permaculture Stronger podcast, or something around the lines of every day the podcast becomes more complete, or I have more clarity around the podcast every day. As I go through these and start to make some suggestions, feel free to comment if any of that hits or resonates. And if anybody else has a suggestion, feel free to type it into the box by just saying Dan, Making Permaculture Stronger, or MPS, and what you might suggest for their daily statement of purpose. For those of you that have worked with Dan before, you know that scale of resonance or affinity. And as we hear these statements, we can hear if it's a clunky or if it's kind of a clingy or if it has a ping or a ring to it. So Dan, feel free to let us know how that hits you or if there's something that makes sense for you.
In the chat?
Go for it, Dan.
I was just going to say,
in the chat, or if you want to just reply, that's fine, either or.
Yeah, that something like that works. The idea that's just the one push-up thing, right? Like every single day I progress an episode every single day. And after 2 weeks, it's highly likely I'll be in the right ballpark. So yeah, simple, but feels good. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. And sometimes it's even as, go ahead, Dad. Sorry.
No, it's John. I just want to confirm and affirm your statement about the push-ups, because that's what I've been doing recently and it really has made a difference. If I go to bed not having done any push-ups, I feel really shit. But if I do one and then go to bed, I go, yeah, I did a push-up. And then, like you say, tomorrow it's 2 and then the next day it's 3. So, yeah.
Awesome. Oh, thanks for the feedback. And yeah, if anybody has commentary or questions right now, we can take a bit of a pause. And if anybody wants to chime in either on the chat or verbally, that'd be great.
I use this, I call it gifts to my future self, just because my life is all about time and using it and whatever. So just really simple things like washing my hair at night is a gift to my morning self that doesn't have to wash their hair in the morning. And it's, it feels so generous and beautiful in the morning when I'm like, I gave that to myself and, thank you. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, that's great, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing that. It also brings up, and we'll talk about this a bit in the second half, but it brings up that by taking these steps, by working these steps, we actually become the people we want to become. We are actively engaged in behavior, not just thought patterns, as is so common in modern society, in building the capacity and becoming the person and working the skills that build the capacity of who we want to become. And so as we do these gifts or these favors for future us, we wake up and we're going, maybe that's actually who I want to be on a daily basis. And all of a sudden it becomes a practice that builds who we want to become. So thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. Just a little bit of space for anybody else who wants to comment, and then we might take another daily statement of purpose or two.
One little comment that just came to mind, there's that idea of, is it called paying it forward? Like you go to the takeaway and you pay for the anonymous stranger behind you. It's a similar idea, but you're making that contribution to your tomorrow self.
My tomorrow self has really been enjoying the idea that yesterday I did something that was important in a non-urgent way, like prepping my bike for a ride to school in the morning. And then when I got up in the morning and my bike was all ready, I had that amazing feeling of release that I didn't have to rush. I'd done it all. And my morning self went, yeah, that was awesome. I'm glad my yesterday self did that little job for me. And then I can just jump on my bike and go. And it's that sense of being in control, doing it in a timely way, and not having to rush, not doing it urgently, which made a big difference to me. Those are my gifts to myself at the moment.
Wonderful gifts, John. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. I'm going to walk down the line a little bit here. So taking a look at Troy, mine is relationships to underlying resentment and negativity. And so Troy, if we just take this as at face value, what we could do is you could do it as a minimum, like I feel less resentment and less negativity towards my partner, or you could do it as a positive step, like I move to be closer in love, or I move to be closer to my partner in love. I worked with a couple years ago, and they reached out a couple days before I was about to take a silent meditation retreat called Vipassana. And it's 10 days of silent meditation. Phones are off. You don't have access to them. You're not talking to anybody. And they called about 3 days before we had a good fit call, which is how I evaluate if it's a good fit for me and good fit for the client. And they said, I really want you to take a look at our dairy operation because we think, you could help because you also do business consulting. And as I was listening to their conversation, it was very clear to me that the dairy was generally pretty well managed. It was the relationship that was problematic. And I said, it would be unethical and a bit ingenuine for me to take money from you to come in and evaluate your business. It would be kind of like me coming in to rearrange your furniture when I see the house is on fire. And what I said is, if you want to work together, I think we can, but I don't think it has anything to do about the business. I think it has to do about your values and your interpersonal and how you relate to each other and how you work with each other. And if you're interested, I can do that from a facilitation standpoint. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a coach. I'm not a counselor. I'm just a guy who's made it through quite a bit and has a number of tools that continually work for folks. And if you want to try that out, we can. But let me know I'm about to go dark in 3 days. You won't hear from me. They called back that night. They said, yeah, we want to work with you, but if it's 14 days away, we think the house is going to be burnt down. I said, okay, here's what I can do. I can talk to you at 10 a.m. on the day that I leave at noon. And I think I have a tool that can help. So we talked to each other at 10 a.m. I heard a little bit from her, a little bit from him. And I said, it sounds like right now the main issue is communication. You both reach out. And the reason why this came up for me, Troy, is 2 statements here: resentment and negativity. And they both had said that. They both reached out with resentment and negativity every time they spoke. And so I said, it's kind of like you have this thought that really needs to be communicated, like, oh, we have to put the kids to bed. But as the walk comes down the stairs, it's dressed super inappropriately and it gets to the foyer of your mind. And instead of checking it out to see how it looks before it exits your mouth, thinking it'll be okay in the great wild, it goes out and it's so provocative, it just responds, or part of me reacts. And so we created a daily statement of purpose in that hour and a half, 2-hour session, which was, we speak out of a place of love and we listen first. And I said, this is the only thing that matters for the next 12 days between you, is that when that thought comes walking down the stairs, whatever it is, and you look at it and you go, no, this isn't in love. This isn't out of compassion. I'm not listening first. You say, you march right back upstairs and you dress appropriately for this situation. I said, that's the best I can do in 2 hours, and I hope it helps. I went into a 10-day meditation retreat. I highly recommend not taking on these types of clients before you go into a 10-day meditation retreat. It was very difficult. It was like trying to lift Olympic weights every day. Like I had all of my stuff and then I had their stuff on top of it. My brain got very big in terms of its ability to be mindful. At the end of the time I had gone to a good neutral state, I kept myself off my phone and my computer for 24 hours while I was still out in the world. And I was like, okay, let's see what happened. I opened up my email and it was from them, and it said, I don't know how you did it, but you lit a candle for us. We're so excited for the next step. I didn't do anything. That's the most important thing to recognize about this story. I didn't do anything. I just pointed out that they were constantly putting gas on a flame. And I was like, you should stop with the gas and you should start to put some sand on the flame. And that's the great thing about daily statements of purpose. So Troy, I'm not saying that that's your situation, Troy, at all, but something around, I reach out with less resentment, or I reach out with less negativity, or in the positive, in the front step, I reach out with positivity, or I reach out with appreciation. How does that land for you, Troy? Does that have any resonance, or is that feeling a little bit outlandish or too much or too little? Again, what I'm talking about is just drafts. It has nothing to do with how the reality of your situation actually is. And feel free if you want to speak openly or in the chat bar, either works. Or you can pass. That's also possible.
Sure. Well, I guess I probably, the statement that I put in was probably incorrect. I should have wrote a little bit more, but I feel like I am always positive. I feel like there is from my past, just me to deal with. That's what I navigate.
So I caught a bit of that, Troy. It sounds like you said that you are quite positive, and then you broke up. What was the second part?
So I was saying it feels like it's more my partner that's negative and shows like a lot of resentment. I feel like I'm always trying to be positive, and it's just dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. I think that's what I'm finding difficult.
Yeah, and what's that difficulty, or how is that making you feel, or what's the thing about it that's feeling like you want change around it?
I guess it's just uncomfortable to be in my home and, have to be tiptoeing around that all the time. And I'm quite mindful not to react. But yeah, I guess it's just frustrating. That's probably the main thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's a couple of ways to approach this. One of them is making space for discussion around what's going on with your partner or what's going on for them. This is definitely something I've learned over the last couple of years of working with couples and working in my own relationship, is that when the other is so absorbed with something, it tends to come out in frustrating ways, at least to me. And so one of my daily statements of purpose years ago was, I make space to check in a non-judgmental way daily. And what that did is it gave me and my partner a chance to have a check-in that they were able to say what was going on for them, and I was able to listen. And the rules of this game is I listen without any commentary except thank you and is there anything else. Those are my two things I get to say. And after they're completely expressed, I then get to reverse and they get to say thank you, is there anything else? What's amazing about having these moments, it's so rare that we do this in partnership, is you really get a sense of not what somebody is thinking, but how somebody is thinking. This was a revelation to me years ago when I was working on a chronic depression that I had. Is somebody had asked me, do you have racing thoughts? And I didn't know what racing thoughts were. And finally, when they described them to me, racing thoughts are where one thought leads to the other until it's so negative and dark and dreary, you don't think anything else will happen. I said, yeah. And they said, what's the percentage of those thoughts? I said, percentage? And they said, yeah, what percentage of those thoughts in the day do you have? I'm like, no, those are just my thoughts. And I realized we always ask, what are you thinking, but not how are you thinking? Like, how are you arriving at the conclusions of what you're doing? And so there's that aspect to understand where she's coming from. But the second thing is to say, okay, if I can't control her or him, however that might play, and we can't, how is it that I can give space to myself? So I've also been in a place recently where my partner has gone through a major COVID destruction of their business and yada, yada. And so I would feel a lot of their angst and their frustration. And so for me on a daily basis, it became, I give myself space to recharge, because I can't, again, their business is theirs. And so I can be present to them, but ultimately I can't change around them. I don't know if either of those are any help in your context or what's landing. I'm curious to hear if any of it is.
Yeah. The first point, definitely making time to sit down and, in a non-judgmental way to discuss
Troy,
the relationship, I guess, and putting time into it.
Troy, I'm going to suggest you turn your video off.
Family and a young business as well, and a farm. We're always pouring all our energy. Sure.
That might be better. You're just cutting out a bit.
No worries. Is that better now?
Yeah. Can we hear what you have to say again?
I think we just find ourselves in the trap of talking about everything else but the relationship. So talking about how we're managing or what we're doing on the farm or what we're doing in the business or the family or other stuff. So no, you're right. We just got to grab the bull by the horns, I guess, and talk about it and put the time into it.
Yeah, that's a great insight, Troy. I would say something around, if this were me, I'm not saying this is for you, but if that was my situation, I think a daily statement of purpose around, I make space for the relationship daily, or I make space for my partner daily, something like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for being one of the first. Dan, as I see us getting to our halfway mark, I'm feeling like I want to take a couple of questions about daily statements of purpose, if anybody has any outstanding, and then shift over to the trauma conversation if that feels comfortable to you.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. So I'd like to give a short recap about daily statements of purpose as a tool or as a state of being or process. And if anybody else has questions specifically about the process, I want to make sure that at least you have a sense of it, so that way you can start to practice or use it. So daily statements of purpose are a way to bring holistic decision-making, values-based decision-making, whatever label you want to give this type of work, into the daily process, into who we are on a day-to-day basis. It's a way of saying, what is the major weak link, frustration, tripping hazard of one of these areas that I'm working in, my business, my life, my relationship, myself, my land, and to bring it to the forefront in all the Gordian knot that we're trying to unweave and understand. What is that one thing that you're still, coming over again and again? To bring it to the forefront and to create a statement out of it that seems accomplishable, something that feels workable, like I give time to my relationship, as Troy was just talking about, or as Dan was talking about. I make some kind of forward step towards the next MSP episode every day, or something even more simple, like I open up my audio software with the intent to work on MPS every day. Something that's just a step, just something that's open. When you're working on that, that statement becomes something that you see or you get reminded of daily, multiple times a day. So write it down on a card, put it in your pocket, take a photograph of it, make it the lock screen of your phone, the wallpaper of your phone, the lock screen of your computer, the wallpaper of your computer. If you're somebody who's not digital, put it all around your house, mirrors, where you wake up, where you make coffee, where you make food, just so that way you bump up against it. You want to make some friction so that way you rub up against it and you're like, oh, right, yeah. And when you see it, you ask, okay, this is what I want to be true right now. It's probably not. What can I do in this moment that will make this true? The last part is to monitor. And so for most people I work with, there's some kind of journaling, even if it's a line or two, digital, hands-on, paper and pen, crayon, scraping into wood, doesn't matter. But you make some sort of documentation about how this is working. Memories for human are very emotionally based and are highly subjective. We don't see things the way they are. We see them the way we are, and we change. So it's really important to take snapshots throughout the day, throughout the week about what's going on. So that way you can accurately look back at the week and see if there's a change. Will you get the first daily statement of purpose right? Probably not perfect. And that's why we document, to see, well, what's the oscillation of how that worked? Sometimes we have to pull back, sometimes we have to go forward. Maybe sometimes we weren't even in the right ballpark. But that daily statement of purpose, at least for me, has been a way to keep values-based decision-making alive in my life. Are there any questions about that process? Is there any clarifications? Anything that anybody wants to clarify for their own personal use? Because we're going to move on to the second part here. Feel free just to unmute. I see John's hand, so we'll let John go first.
I'm just wondering about the similarity or the coincidence of your daily statement of purpose and Dan's enabling action. Sometimes my enabling actions are worded in a very similar way as what you're suggesting, and that enabling action is directly connected to one of my quality of life statements. So they seem to me like they're having the same, they have the same purpose and they will have the same outcome. How do we feel about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So your enabling actions, your quality of life statements, they could actually be the focus. This is more of a focusing tool or a crosshair tool to put that right in front of you on a daily basis, to move the needle on that one element. So it could be one and the same. It could just be, that's the thing that we really need to focus on. And that's one of the ways to use it. And I love that you brought up that distinction. So it doesn't have to be new, doesn't have to be novel. It could already be within your value set or in your context in some way.
Yeah. The other thing is that we were encouraged to be brave and reach out to our future by making our quality of life statements scary, unobtainable in some regards, and big in our lives. But these are sounding like sort of ephemeral quality of day statements, temporary quality of action statement for today or the next week or two, and then they poof disappear, and we can fall back to our quality of life statements and still work towards those. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And the nice thing is as Dan was talking about, at least in our course, I don't know about the others, but I use a life wheel assessment called a radar diagram with different qualities and quantities. So that way, if you've got a radial spoke of 0 to 10, let's say, what'll happen is whatever you focus on, you'll see an increase of that satisfaction on that spoke. And inherently something else will feel frustrating. It's one of those perks of being human. It comes in the software of us. There will always be something we'll complain about. So the great thing is that this is a never ending process of, well, what's feeling alive, what's feeling frustrating now, and then readjusting. So hopefully they go poof. Hopefully they're just no longer a problem, because then we're focusing on something else.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Great distinction. Anybody else? Any other distinctions, questions, comments, queries, quotations?
Question, because it's a daily statement. I'm sorry if you already talked about this because I missed the first 20 minutes or so, but are you actually like reevaluating the statement on a daily basis, or are you kind of coming up with the statement and then just working with that statement until it feels like it's making the improvements or kind of doing its work?
Yeah, what's the routine of consistency? I love that. Thank you. I tend to reevaluate my daily statements of purpose when I do my spot checks. And so I take a spot check of my context almost monthly. And the way that I do the spot checks of my context is whatever the quality of life statements are, they're usually categories. So for leisure, for example, I have a single statement that says unweighted. I want my leisure time to be unweighted. I don't want to feel like as I go into leisure, there's something on top of it. Besides all of those quality of life statements, I end up doing that radar diagram again. And I basically rate my satisfaction with all of these, with the caveat that each quality of life statement cannot be the same rating as the others. And so they inherently have to be gradated. There has to be one that's low and one that's high. There can't be 2 4s or 2 5s or 2 6s. They all have to be within 0 and 10. And if I've got a 2, it's a little warning bell. It's kind of like a dashboard light that goes, I bet you the thing that's really frustrating me right now is in this category. And for a long time, it was leisure, because I was so focused on my work, I never got a chance to have leisure time that really worked for me. And underneath my leisure time I had this sort of metaphorical statement of lion lounging, which for me, when lions are at rest, they couldn't be more at rest. Here's like a 600-pound killing animal that's just like a wet rag draped over a sub-Saharan tree. And then the next moment is taking down a gazelle, lion lounging. And when I'm in action, I'm in action. When I was looking at that, I was like, this is my problem. I'm never in that state. When I'm in that state, like whenever I've finished the day, I'm always thinking about, did I reply to Dan? And what's about this project I'm doing? And so I created this daily statement of purpose, which ended up becoming a value, which is another interesting way of how values can develop, which is work at work, home at home. And so that way I was focusing on how do I create systems and processes and ways of being. And I got into this practice. This is how it came about, because I was thinking about this all the time through the daily statement of purpose process, where I was like, okay, I don't leave work because I work at home. I don't shut down the computer. I don't have a ritual that says, I'm done. So I started to wear work shirts, which in Canada was apparently plaid. And I would take off my work shirt, even if there was 2 types of plaid. There was working plaid, and then there was, leisure plaid. But I would take it off and I would put it on. And for me, that was that dividing line. I went from the boundary of work into the boundary of home. And it was just this way of unweighting. And this other client I was working with, he had a 2-hour commute from home to work. And there was a point in his drive where there was a beautiful vista. And so we created a process for him to turn off, to take in the vista, to do, I think he had a 2-minute meditation process. And when he got home, he put his briefcase in the garage. That was his way of saying work stays at work. My briefcase literally doesn't come home with me. And when I enter into home, it was at home. So my practice has been spot checks when I go into my spot checks, to rate my quality of life statements, gradated rating, to take a look at that area that's super frustrating. And usually either I'm highlighting an enabling action, as Dan calls them. I call them behaviors and systems. Doesn't matter. It's the thing you do to make sure the quality of life happens. And then go, great. Is that what's the missing piece, or is there something that's feeling more accomplishable? Because as John was talking about, we definitely try to shoot for the stars within our quality of life statements and enabling actions and things of that nature. So sometimes you have to make it a little bit more accomplishable. So every month I go and do my spot check. How am I doing? What's going on? Is my daily statement of purpose still relevant? Or else am I just, holding on to this thing, or still wearing the same socks that I was a month ago? And is it getting a little gnarly? So that's how I go in and I process it. Great question. Thanks so much. Any other questions about daily statements of purpose? Okay, great. If anybody has any other questions about daily statements of purpose and you want to reach out, feel free. allpointsdesign.ca or javan@allpointsdesign.ca. So I wanted to talk a little bit now about the idea of when we make our values and we go out into the world and we say, great, these are the values that we want. They're ambitious, they're bold, they might not be true in the moment, and we might get a really big pushback from different parts of us. And in my work and my facilitation work over the years, I realized that I'd be working with people, we'd be building our value set, and something would come up. There'd be a big pushback internally that just said, no, I can't do this. So common quality of life statement for a number of clients I work with and myself is, I eat nutritious food, I breathe clean air, and I drink living water. And for anybody who's grown up in our society that is salt, fat, and sugar focused when it comes to our food, and has basically created and hijacked our biology to create addictive food, and has probably grown up with parents or society that says, if you're upset, you should eat. If you're frustrated, you should eat. That can be a really tough statement. That can be a really tough value. And what I found is that values-based decision-making, holistic decision-making actually became an incredible detector of personal resistance. As I was moving towards values that were important to me, I found that there was personal resistance that was coming on. There was something that just didn't feel right about what it was that I was doing. And similarly to the idea that holistic decision-making, values-based decision-making is a way of working on having a life aligned with goals, or it's a way of working on being more alive and embodied in what you're doing. And it's not the only way. Similarly, I've gone through a number of different processes to understand elements of what's going on internally inside of me. And George Box, a British statistician, said it best when he said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And why are all models wrong? Because they're not reality. So values-based decision-making is a great model, but it's not life. It's a way of looking at your life. It's a lens to put on and be like, oh yeah, that helps. But it's actually not full-on life, because nothing is. That's the great thing about reality, is that it is what it is, and it is as we see it. So as I was realizing this and working with this and working with my own work over the last 20 years, I came across an incredible psychoanalyst who was a mentor of mine. He'd been in psychoanalyst work for 40 years. And when I met him, he had boiled down his toolbox to 2 tools. And I thought, well, somebody's been at this for 40 years. This has got to be of some kind of value. And one of the tools was a process called voice dialogue. Voice dialogue was created by Hal and Sidra Stone. And it has the presupposition that at any time we're walking around with our ego, which they call the operating ego, and it has a number of voices and parts. It has the pusher that constantly pushes us to go forward. It has the critic that's criticizing all the things we do. Any number of different parts are alive and well within us. And while I worked with a number of different tools with folks who are having personal resistance with their values work, I found when I came to voice dialogue, I found a really effective tool. And what I found through voice dialogue is that so much of the resistance I was finding in myself and in others when it came to our values was trauma-based. I'm a student of and a follower of Dr. Gabor Mate's work, who has focused on trauma and is focused on addiction in particular. And is currently in a conference right now called The Wisdom of Trauma, with a movie of the same name that is currently available to watch if anybody's interested, I think until Sunday for free. And in it, he explains his concept of trauma. And simplified is this, is that when we are born, we have two needs: a need for attachment and a need for expression. And every day of the week, we'll give up our need for expression for attachment, because biologically, we're incredibly vulnerable when we're born. And there's the biological evolution of that and why that is. And it has to do with the cognitive revolution and the increase of our brains, and the fact that we need a long gestation time to make sure our brains are so extraordinary, being able to be a thinking sapient, thinking about thinking. But needless to say, we come out and we're super vulnerable. And when we come out, we're narcissists by all classic pathologies. Me, I want. But we have these two needs: our needs to be loved, to be taken care of, to be changed, but we also have this need for expression. And if that need for expression isn't met, or if we worry that if we express ourselves, we may not be attached, we'll give up expression. And through our lives, we create a number of parts, different voices, different ways of being, commonly called coping mechanisms, that will go out to meet the things we need in usually a toxic way, not usually the way that we want it. So an example of this is, for the longest time in relationship, I would come home, and if the kitchen was a mess, I would at different levels blow a fuse, either like pop or like, ugh, and go passive aggressive. What I realized as I got into it is that there was a moment in my past where I was exceptionally frustrated with my parents splitting up. I was really worried about losing these two people who I loved and this cocoon that was making my life. And I was drawing one day and coloring in a coloring book, and I realized if I just colored inside the coloring lines, it felt like this little tiny 5-year-old had control. So control gave me control. And I sought it for the rest of my life. A part of me sought it for the rest of my life. And within voice dialogue, there's a couple of really simple tools that I can teach to all of you. And what's important to realize is that voice dialogue is not the tool for all of you. Voice dialogue may be the tool for some of you. But the bigger conversation, as we pull the lens way back, is that as we go about values-based decision-making, you're going to encounter personal resistance to creating some of these values to be true. And what I can say about this is to be very curious about what's going on. One of the practices I teach is this idea of training our response, that when we're having an emotional reaction, to train a response of interesting. Just to take a pause and go, interesting. I'm blowing a fuse over a couple of cups and a couple of crumbs. Huh, that's interesting. You can graduate to fascinating, which for me, and this is specific to me, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and I always go back to Spock raising that eyebrow and going, fascinating. And what's interesting about that is that when you are in a curious state, it's very hard to be in a negative state of mind. There's a couple of studies that say it's impossible, that when you're in a curiosity state of mind, it's impossible to be angry. And what's interesting about anger is a secondary emotion. It's not a primary emotion. We get angry about a feeling that we're having. So when we're in that state of being, if we can go interesting or fascinating, or we can graduate to good and great, which if you think is impossible, totally fair. I thought they were impossible when I started off. But when we're in those moments, in those examples, when we're trying to move towards, I'm a loving, caring human being, or my finances come easily. It's another quite common quality of life statement I see. And we can feel the reaction inside of us. It's an amazing moment to be highly observational. For those of us that work with landscape, it's very similar when we read the landscape, we understand where the energies flow. Internally, when we do the same thing, we understand where our energies are being stuck or where they're being a little bit sticky. After interesting or fascinating, there's another step which I use all the time, which is I have this feeling of X inside of me. And what this does is it creates distance between us and it. The other way of saying this is a part of me feels. So as I was getting ready for today, I was thinking, part of me was thinking, oh, I'm doing this thing with Dan, and Dan's so amazing. And I in some ways was taught by Dan indirectly, but not directly. Who am I to have these things to say? And I stopped and I was like, oh, that's really fascinating. There's a part of me that really feels undeserving of this space and undeserving of being able to share this today. And the moment I say a part of me, it's no longer me. It's removed from me. And now I can actually look at it. It's like separating from it and looking at it and going, what are you about? And this is where Dr. Gabor Mate's work comes in very valuable, is of being compassionately curious about it. Where did you come from? What are you about? Why do you do the things you do? What do you get out of this? And this is where his work about addictions has been so phenomenal in my facilitation, is that when you realize that all addictions are facilitated moments of these parts trying to get what they want out of this young one that we were, sense of self-expression, it becomes very plain that there's more work than just values-based decision-making, which I was under the guise of for many years. I thought if I just knew my values, I'll be fine. Not true. Values definitely allowed me to externally have a better sense of the horizon. But sometimes I was so focused on the horizon, I didn't know that I had a bum leg that was dragging behind me and constantly was being hung up by roots and rocks and just didn't allow me to walk properly. Or I had low max oxygen, or I had asthma, all of these things that were internal. If we're using this metaphor of hiking, that great, I want to know where the horizon is, but what are the personal resistance that might be coming up? And so Dan asked me to talk about this because I've specialized in it for at least 6 years of really being curious, not from a pathology sense. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a coach. I'm not a counselor. I'm just super curious. And that's the great thing about voice dialogue, is it is a non-pathologizing, curiosity-based lens of inquiry. Similarly, Dr. Gabor Mate teaches a process called compassionate inquiry, which you can take a look at on his website. He has a great pre-recorded course, which I've gone through, which is phenomenal to learn the process. It's just about being compassionate to yourself. If you have a self, as I do, that if it's frustrated, will reach for a beautiful bottle of scotch in the evening, so that way it's choosing me instead of me choosing it. The next day I can be compassionate towards myself and go, oh, this comes from a place inside of me. This is actually trying to solve something, which is I probably want a state change. I don't want to feel the way I'm feeling, so I'd rather feel a little buzzed. Or, as happens during the daytime, caffeine. I have a part of me that loves to have a little buzz in the middle of the day when it's feeling frustrated with the process I'm doing, instead of realizing that whatever it is I'm doing actually doesn't work at that time of day. And this is where really being curious about these pieces of personal resistance can really help your values. Because yes, I have a value of productivity. Yes, I have a value of doing the things I want to do when I want to do them. But if every day at 2 p.m., I feel like my mind is slowing down and my body is slowing down and I'm just tired, there may be any number of reasons that is. From a Chinese medicine perspective, that has to do with a certain liver and gallbladder channel. From a different typology, it has to do with the fact that my dosha, if we're going to Ayurvedic medicine, just generally has me being low at that time of day. And so sometimes this means just being reflective and being like, oh, I shouldn't do super heavy mental lifting things in between about 12 and 3. And I've learned that about myself. And as I've looked into some of the things that will come up for me during that time, which is, if anybody shares this, oh, I should be able to go at full tilt all day, every day, going at 110 kilometers an hour. I'm also aware that there's a part of me that's starting to be upset with myself during that time. So again, all of this is to say that quality of life, values, holistic decision-making, values-based decision-making, whatever you call it, making and living your life through your values is an exceptional way of being. But when something comes up and it feels like, oh, I can't get there, really question if it's something that might be going on internally, and really question the feelings you have about feeling like you can't achieve it. Because it's really easy to get upset about the obstacle when usually the obstacle is the way. Whatever it is that's in front of us is this beautiful X marks the spot of like, oh, this is the work that's next. And in my work, it's been incredibly humbling to realize that if I'm going into a session like tonight and I feel this coming up, it's like, oh, interesting. I've worked on these parts of me that have issues of self-worth and imposter syndrome and all the rest of it. And also I have parts of me that love sharing these things that I've learned over the last little while. And as I have these parts, and this is the part of voice dialogue I love so much, it's about being aware of these parts. Sometimes in psychology, it's called parts work or the psychology of selves. And this is used in family family constellation system or the interfamily system. Jung and Freud both talked a little bit about part works, but it's really been expanded over the last couple of years and decades. Parts works gives you the ability to realize that all your parts, and this is important to hear, are necessary. If you were drinking late one night and you woke up in the morning and your liver was telling you that was a bad idea, and your stomach was telling you what were you doing, and your brain was telling you, man, what truck did we get hit by last night? You wouldn't say, oh, I've got to cut them out. It's like, oh, I wish I could just cut out my brain or cut out my liver. And we do that a lot in pop psychology. We say, oh, let's slay the ego. And yet the ego is us. This is one of the things I love about voice dialogue. It's ecologically based. If we have an element in ecology that's out of balance, if we take a look at from an ecological conversation, it's about balance. It's not about the fact that we have to slay this part or we have to rid ourselves of this part. It's about understanding that all these parts are playing roles and functionalities or taking up niches, and they're trying to take up space within certain vital elements. And to realize, as Sharon put it, all parts are welcome. It's a dramatically different way of looking at our lives. And I found highly complementary to values-based decision-making. So again, I really want to make this clear because humans love to deify. We're a herd animal. We like followers. We like leaders. We like being followers. We like looking to leaders. You know, don't deify any process I've said today. Don't deify me, please, please, please. But just realize that if you are working with values-based decision-making or holistic management or holistic decision-making, to really be aware that there's going to be some personal resistance that comes up, and chances are there's work to be done there. And that doesn't mean that the tool of values-based decision-making is problematic. It just means it's highlighted a place for you to play and to look at and to work on. So a bit of this is a cautionary tale. A bit of this is, here's a couple of tools. And again, some of those tools are training your reaction to be a response instead of a reaction through the idea of interesting, fascinating, good, and great. It's about identifying that there's a feeling inside of me, or that there's a part of me that feels ba 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 ba. So in this recent fight I had with my partner, there was many parts of me that felt hurt, frustrated, angered, disavowed, embittered, belittled. The list goes on. I'm sure nobody here has had a fight with anybody of any merit, but you know that there's a long list. But if I can say those things, I can separate from those things and go, interesting. Whew. There's a lot of things that are alive in me, and I can work with them and operate with them, and I can relate to my partner from this place within voice dialogue called the aware ego. I'm aware of these parts, and now I can make a choice from center instead of being pulled off to one side, the hurt one or the frustrated one, or anybody fights like I fight. When people start throwing daggers, I pull out swords, and when I pull out swords, they pull out axes, and I pull out bazookas, and it gets bad quick. I'm not saying I'm a great fighter at all. But all of that helps us to encapsulate the idea that it's important to realize that we're multifaceted beings. Values-based decision-making, holistic decision-making is a phenomenal tool to keep in your life. And it's important to realize that personal resistance is going to come up. And when it comes up, to have ways of working with it. And these are just a few of the ways that I've worked with and I facilitate because I found them to be so effective. Whew. Any questions about that?
I'll just jump in quickly. So thanks so much, Javan. Thanks for sharing. I felt well, a part of me felt joy as you were sharing around as we've discussed before, a similar discovery in my own journey. In my case, I came across a single possibility management, which supported me with a lot of that, working on past decisions and assumptions and traumas and beliefs and a lot of the feelings stuff, which has felt like such an integrally important part of the larger picture. Yeah, so thank you. And yeah, I'd love to hear any questions anyone has.
Thanks, Dan. I think your comment really shows that we're going to find tools that work for us and make sense to us. And it's just great to know that that's an aspect of this work. So thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Hey.
Hey,
how's my internet connection?
A little spotty. Maybe turn
Good.
off the video so we can
Thank
get clean audio.
Yeah, sure. Stop. Okay, how's that?
Better
Good?
already.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I can.
Better? Yeah. So I just wanted to recommend a book to read called The Mastery of Love by something or other, and his last name is Ruiz. He talks about people experiencing that we carry a whole lot of traumatic sores inside our bodies, like emotional sores, and to release them and let them go. Like there's a sickness through our whole society. And I guess my question is, once they're released and they're let go, how do we function around all the people who are cherishing theirs?
I've got a bit of a story about that. I've worked with this couple for about 4.5, 5 years. He came and we created a context together, and then he attributed our work together and some of the interpersonal work we did to being able to meet his now wife. And so they came to make a context together. And then most recently, we worked on a major decision that was affecting their life. And what ended up happening is they were having a bit of a row. And so I suggested we each have a session of voice dialogue together, and then we have one, all the three of us. And what was so interesting is that by experiencing this process, and in voice dialogue, it can have this through path. It's kind of like diagramming plumbing or electrical or where water flows, is that when we're young, we have these young, vulnerable ones. And when they feel frightened, afraid, fearful, they end up creating these primary selves that protect, that have rules, have ways of being. And within voice dialogue, you actually get a chance to speak to and through these parts. We actually move the facilitatee so that they can experience it and then go through it. And what's so interesting is when you go through that process, you have a different point of view about the world. And so I'd worked with her first. And as we came to him, I had a chance to talk to her a little bit before we had his session. And what was so fascinating was I said, "How's the week been going?" And she goes, "Now that I know how this works inside of me, I can actually see the young ones that are so hurt in him. Even when he's being passive aggressive, even when he's being frustrated, even when he's being angry with me, I can actually see it's not him. I can actually see that, oh, there's this young one in him that was traumatized when they were young, and they're feeling so afraid and so frightened. And I can actually speak to that one." And this changes the way we operate with people. We don't do it perfectly all the time. I'm a great example, but it changes slowly over time. Again, if we've had 10 or 20 years of our formative years being in this state of being, it's not going to happen overnight. There's some great cultures out there that know how to work with this. The Inuit are one of them. I highly recommend people take a look. There's 2 articles about, I don't remember the titles of them at all, but if you search things like how Inuit parents deal with anger with their children or something like that, you'll get a good sense of what that is. And I'm sure Dan's already finding it. But there's examples is what I want to say. And especially in tribal cultures where they realize that you have to bring people through maturity. You have to give them the challenge to let go of their narcissism and to take responsibility. And that's why there's fatalistic rites of passage in most Indigenous societies. But what I found for myself is that as I'm going through this process, I can actually see the vulnerability that somebody is giving when they're angry or when they're frustrated or when they're fearful. And by doing that, I actually become a more compassionate human. And if you go back to the etymology of compassion, come with pathos, suffering. Compassion is to suffer with somebody. When they're angry, when they're frustrated, when they're just totally and utterly out of control, you recognize their pain. You recognize their frustration. You recognize it and you don't feed it. And what's amazing is that when you don't feed that primary self that's acting in response to this vulnerable trauma, it calms. And what I found is in my relationship with clients and clients' parts, the great thing about working with parts of people is that you give them permission from a facilitator's point of view to say whatever it is you want to say. And in this work, we really ask basic questions like, what's the worst thing about not getting your own way? And I've on multiple occasions had clients' parts, because they're speaking through their part, go, what do you mean? Getting your own way is the best thing in the world. Not getting your way sucks. You're an idiot for not knowing that. And the practice of being not attached, of being compassionate and going, that's really interesting, has allowed me to process what somebody else is going through at the same time as I feel it rise in me. Because it exists in me. Of course it does. We're all human. We're all going through the same thing. And this is one of those great processes like holistic decision-making that you can practice every day, every moment of the day. And the more you practice, the bigger the muscles you get, right? The bigger the capacity gets, the more oxygen your lungs can fill, so to speak. So my experience has been with conversations around individuals of really reactive nature, you can see what's going on in them. It doesn't mean you don't pull them out of running into traffic. It just means you don't then energetically take on what's going on with them, which I did for years and still do every once in a while when I lose my center as well. But it's just, again, this other level. And I love that the book you were bringing up, if it is indeed the book that The Mastery of Love by Don Miguel, because his other book that talks about the 4 tools, or I forget what the title of the book is, but in essence, it's don't take anything personally. Realize that other people's conversations are theirs and not ours. And what they're going through is what they're going through. But because we're empathetic beings, because we have neurons and we feel what other people are feeling, we've never been taught, feel it, but don't give in to it. And ostensibly, that's actually what Gautama the Buddha taught 2,600 years ago through Vipassana meditation, is to feel the sensation and rise in you and to not identify with it, to train a sense of equanimity. Is it easy? No, those 10 days of meditation were some of the hardest things I've ever done, if not the hardest things I've ever done. But it brings you up to a state where you're now able to have people yell and scream and get really frustrated with you, and you can go, oh man, this person's really hurting. And if you watch any of Dr. Gabor Mate's work or Byron Katie's work or any number of Indigenous practitioners and leaders, you get the sense, the Dalai Lama is a wonderful human to watch, or Thich Nhat Hanh, is that they've gotten to a place where they realize that the sensation arises inside of them and they don't attribute anything to it. They don't attach to it negatively or positively. Attaching it to it negatively is like, I want it. Attaching to it negatively is get it away from me, aversion. And so for me, understanding this work deeply has allowed me to know that when I hear somebody speaking and I see the emotion in them, is to be compassionate with them as I would with my nephew or my niece, like, oh man, what's going on? Like, what happened? Instead of thinking that, oh, this has something to do with me. And that's what's been helpful. I don't know if that helps with your question, but that's what I've been doing for at least the last 10 years. And I'd like to think I'm getting better with it. Does that answer your question, Josie?
I think it's exactly what I've been needing to hear. I'm really thankful. At the same time that we're getting all these links, I'm really thankful, because how to treat people who are suffering and take them through to a space where they're not is a real gift. So thanks for giving me some insight into doing that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that, again, what somebody else is going through is ostensibly not my business. It need not be my business. I can make the conscious choice to be compassionate with them. But I think at a more basic level, if that's all we can accomplish, it's like, oh, this person is really suffering and it has nothing to do with me. I remember leaving a farm that I was living at, and the husband of the couple who ran the farm had already left for an international trip, and the wife was there, and she had just been left by her husband again for him to go do his purpose, which was going to another country and to do incredible work. And I was leaving as well, but I was moving off farm. And we all participated in chores many times, and emptied the compost, the human urine composting. For anybody that doesn't know what human urine is, it's composting your feces and your urine. And we had a bucket system. So make your deposit, put on the sawdust, make your deposit, put on the sawdust, transfer everything over to a big pile that's managed. I was leaving. I had a ferry to hit. I would have had to wait 3 hours for the next ferry. And the wife of this person came up and was irate that I hadn't emptied the human or compost. Wasn't my turn. My turn was a couple of weeks ago, and I made sure that was the case, so it didn't land on the day I was leaving. But she was having a big moment about the fact that he had just left, swearing, screaming at me, shaking her fist about 2 inches from my face. And I said, I really hear this is important to you, and I have to go. I can't miss this ferry. Everybody leaves here. Nobody does the work. Nobody takes care of their shit. All of that was like, wow, this person is going through something that has nothing to do with the human urine compost. It's just the object of the obsession. I said, listen, I have to go. I'm really sorry about this. And when I'm back, if you want me to take it out a couple times, I can, but I have to make this ferry. She swore at me. She insulted me a bit more, and she turned around and she walked away. Was I shaking when I got in the car? Yeah. Did I feel like the relationship I built with this human for the last 3 years was gone? Yeah. Did it take me 2 to 3 days to calm down? Yeah. But did I add to that situation by hurling insults back? Did I injure that person, and by injuring them, injure myself? No. Is it where I want to be long term? And this was 8 years ago now. No. And I've built more capacity to where, especially with folks that are in that situation, I'm able to be more able when it comes to compassion. But it takes time. It takes compassion with yourself. If you want to build that skill, that's a choice as well. None of this is prescription based. This is a choice. It helps me to be more sovereign. And I've realized that All Points Life Design, which is my land design company, and my life design company, regenerativliving.online, which is my education company, my efforts in podcasting, my efforts in teaching, this is all through a piece of essence for me, which is about living sovereign, about being the creator and the created of my life. That's what I'm so fascinated by. How do we become the created of our life? And how do we become the creators? This was like the monarchs of old. The monarchs of old felt that they were given a sliver of God, and through that, they could create everybody's life around them. I'm not going that far, but I am taking responsibility for what I put out in the world more and more every day. As I see some of my contemporaries spew more hate or spew more condemnation or judgment, I'm realizing that we have never had such reach. We've never had such amplification before. And every day it's more important for us to be very aware of how we put ourselves into the world and what we say and how we present ourselves. So I think in this space, whatever we can do to increase our compassion, to increase our sense of self-awareness. Change is 100%. The first 10% is awareness, and is a prerequisite for the other 90 The next 30% is tools and techniques. If you're doing the math, we haven't even crossed 50 yet. The last 60% is doing the work. It's lifting the weight when you don't want to lift the weight. It's having a 1% day and doing a 1 push-up. It's being compassionate with somebody for one moment when you don't want to, and then maybe giving into your bit more baser, lesser instincts. And then the next day going, okay, I had at least one moment yesterday. I'm going to try for 2 today. It's just practice and being super kind with ourselves. And I think we've lost that. I think that's something that we just don't talk about. We just don't say is important anymore. So I applaud you for any effort you put towards it. It's remarkable, and the people around you are better for it.
I would like to mirror your sentiment that compassion and self-kindness are very important. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sharon's just talked about internal family systems, which is another system of selves or part psychology way of working. And it's a beautiful path. It's a beautiful way. So great to have people interested in these processes. So with that, I just want to close by saying, because we come to our time, and I'm willing to stay on for a little bit of time if anybody else has any questions, but I want to formally end because I know that Dan said that this was 90 minutes. I just applaud everybody being interested in this work. It's just remarkable. The more I've seen people focus on their values, the more I've seen them be more of help and more of value to their ecology and to the people around them. It's lifelong work. It doesn't end at the end of the course. Both Dan and I have become, independent champions of this work, and together sometimes we have superhero team ups, which I love. It's super great to not have to do this alone. And just to keep at it. I think we're both developing communities of practice around this, and there'll be opportunities to learn and grow more. I've got a podcast that's starting up whenever the artwork comes back called Tools of Sovereignty that will be around this, that if you're interested in, you can go to allpointsdesign.ca, sign up for the newsletter at the bottom of the homepage, be notified when it's out. I'll probably be doing a values-based decision-making course in the fall. If anybody wants to try voice dialogue, I have a policy of a free session, and it's at my leisure. So if I'm booked up, know that it may be in a while, but it's an opportunity over 90 minutes to experience voice dialogue, see what it's like, and see if it's a tool that you enjoy. Besides that, I just love the fact that you're all here, and just a huge, immense thanks to Dan for pioneering and translating so much of Alan Savory's work into a more digestible process that inspired me and allowed us to be friends, and just spreading this type of work and this type of compassion in the world. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you, Dan, and all of you being interested in it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Javan. It's been a real pleasure to have you along. I've really enjoyed being in the background, just like looking up links and stuff. It's such a kind of a relief. But I deeply appreciate where you've taken this, and the way you communicate so deeply and so clearly. So thanks, Javan. And yeah, awesome to see those of you that showed up. Looking forward to staying in touch. You probably got an email, because you're here, you saw the email in which I also mentioned that I'm going to do an experiment for the rest of this year, and a free ongoing every 2 month HTM catch up. So I really hope to catch some of you there to stay in touch in the meantime. You'll see in all the links a link to Javan's. Well, I've got the allpointsdesign.ca site. Javan, did you want to mention the other one?
Regenerativliving.online is a non-ideologically based educational website for skills that will help us live on the planet as if we intend to stay. I saw a lot of folks being ideologically recalcitrant and getting into their corners over the last year. And it was just a way for me to start to practice and play with certain ways of being, be it how do we store all of our own food in a year, or what does regenerative soils look like, or how do you design a multifunctional hedgerow, or work with biochar, so that way we don't have to be ideological based, but still be online and have exceptional practitioners, just working with an indigenous off-grid farmer and homesteader, and Filipino woman who's fantastic when it comes to different types of design. So it's a resource around that. Thanks for the conversation there, Dan. And if anybody's interested in the life design work, you can just type in allpointsdesign.ca/life and you can get more of that information.